I'm Weissr. We are the world leaders within CapEx and capital allocation decisions. Is your company capital intensive or not? What is the definition of a capital intensive company? We all think it's a company where a lot of capital is spent over the life cycle of that business to maintain the business. Like in the example where the CapEx level in an ordinary year is 10% of sales. That's a lot. The EBITDA margin is high to compensate for that. It is impossible to keep the business alive if the EBITDA margin is 8%, for instance. In this second example, we have a business that we can view as less capital intensive. The CapEx level in an ordinary year is 2.5% in relation to sales. The EBITDA margin is lower. Seen for an industry over a life cycle, there is an obvious relationship between CapEx percent of sales and the EBITDA margin. If we make a simple assumption that no industries, capital intensive or not, are more or less profitable than other industries, then the net present value of that industry seen over a life cycle is the same as for all other industries, in fact close to zero. In other words, the relationship between CapEx levels and EBITDAs seen over a life cycle must be the same between industries. If that is not the case, there would be industries with a lot higher or lower net present value seen over a life cycle, and that situation would eventually see capacity being added or removed, re-establishing some kind of equilibrium. Theoretical? Maybe to some degree, but you see our point. Let us go back to our two companies again. What makes a company or industry capital intensive or not is the CapEx relationship to EBITDA or to cash flow, not to sales. Although the examples above compare what is typically considered a capital-intensive company with a less capital-intensive company, their CapEx relationship between EBITDA and cash flow are identical. In other words, they are from a value creation point of view equally capital-intensive. The CapEx relationship to cash flow seen over a life cycle is the same between all industries. With that reasoning, all industries or businesses that spend capital have the same capital intensity. The values of the two example businesses will be equally impacted if their CapEx efficiency is up or down by 10%. This is what successful companies take into consideration when allocating capital across their different operations. We are often brought in to deal with mills in the pulp, paper, packaging and steel industries. We often do not look at the downstream operations such as converting, since those are less capital intensive. Companies often don't see the importance of allocating capital efficiently in those businesses. In their defense, they are more cost intensive, but again, not less capital intensive. We have dealt with hundreds of mills in the pulp, paper, packaging and steel industries and an increasing number of downstream operations, like converting, previously considered less capital intensive. Our experience is that the value losses from a poor allocation of capital is larger in industries that are perceived as being less capital intensive. The value loss is probably larger there because they pay less attention to it, which is a recipe for failure. The need for focus on improved capital allocation and creating CapEx strategies is the same all over, but issues differ. In a steel mill or paper mill, typical issues are increasing or decreasing capacity, closures, larger replacements, long-term competitiveness, access to raw material, and so on. In a converting plant, for instance in the food industry or similar industry, it is more about location, freight to customers, responsiveness to customers, roofs, shifts, competence, etc. They are all about asset and CapEx decisions at some point. Again, a 10% loss in CapEx or asset decision preciseness has the same value effect all over. Successful companies must pay the same attention to capital wherever it's spent.